Chapter 8, titled 1970, The First Group Ordination. Life among young Western spiritual seekers in the East continued peacefully as they were mostly unaware of the many tumultuous events unfolding in the outside world. Communication with family took place via aerograms or rarely telephone calls. Letters and aerograms took weeks to reach their destinations, followed by more weeks for replies to arrive. International phone calls, which were rather expensive, had to be placed at the government central telephone exchange in downtown Kathmandu. A person made a reservation for a call and then waited and waited and waited, usually for hours, sometimes all day, until that call was placed and the connection was made. Once connected, it was hit or miss whether the connection would last for more than a few minutes. There were no personal computers, no internet, no email, no cell phones, the dark ages when compared to the 21st century. Many new acquaintances. Winter and New Year 1970 came and went. Zena, Robbie, Rhonda, and Jan stayed on at Kopan. A newly ordained American nun, Sultram Alione, known as Joan Ewing before her ordination by the Gelwa Karmapa in January 1970, arrived in Kathmandu in the early spring. Zena heard about her and paid her a visit. Finding her sick with hepatitis, she presented a kada and insisted that Sultram come up to Kopan by taxi to be looked after. At Kopan, Zena offered tea to her guest and recounted the story of how she had met the lamas in Darjeeling, just when she was trying to decide whether to go to Hong Kong for a facelift or commit herself to spiritual practice. The next day, Lama Yeshe visited the new nun. He was warm, radiant, with sparkling brown eyes and buck teeth with a big gap in the middle, she recalled. He laughed a lot and told me not to worry about hepatitis, just to imagine my body being washed with white light, starting at my head and passing out through my feet. In due course, she recovered. Some of Zena's artist friends returned to Kopan. An occasional guest was Baba Ram Das, an American disciple of Neem Karoli Baba. His friend Oa Del Banco, a Danish hippie with very long hair who favored bright turbans and Asian dress, came to visit Ram Das while he was staying at Kopan. I had been to Kopan once before while I was tripping on acid. I thought the place was full of demons, said Oa. Zena had encouraged me to stay, offering food and pocket money, which I thought too good to be true. I shared a room with a lunatic who wouldn't talk because he was in retreat, but he wrote me notes every 5 minutes until I went nuts. The lamas weren't there at the time, so I had no idea they existed. At the beginning of February, the lamas went to Dharamsala for Tibetan New Year. Zena joined them briefly, but she was happy to return to Kopan and was hoping to do a long retreat. She brought back 2 new Bhutanese nannies to take care of Rhea, who divided her time between Kopan and Kathmandu. Zena was a very determined woman and never allowed Rhea into her room while she was meditating. The little girl would stand outside and scream and yell, and Lama Yeshe rushed to comfort her, exhorting Zena to take more care and be more considerate. He often rocked the child in his arms and sang a strange little song, which went something like this. Oh, your mother is going away, your mother is going to leave. What a thing to sing to a child, people thought. Why would he do that? Max takes Lama Yeshe to Kashmir. During one of her school holidays, Max accompanied Lama Yeshe to Delhi, where he shared a room at the Hotel Diplomat with Domo Geshe Rinpoche from Samten, Choling Monastery in Gum. Doma Geshe was on his way to Switzerland to perform certain rituals for the Tibetan community there. At Lama Yeshe's request, Max accompanied Domo Geshe Rinpoche on what she recalls was the first ever 747 jumbo jet flight out of India. She also brought him back to Delhi as usual, paying all costs. Max wanted to take Domo Geshe and Lama Yeshe to Japan for a short holiday, but this was not possible on their Indian identity certificates. The government issued travel documents given to refugees. Instead, they spent a week on a houseboat in Dal Lake in Srinagar, capital of the northwestern state of Jammu and Kashmir. Domo Geshe Rinpoche, who spoke excellent English, took many photographs. Max Matthews said Domo Geshe was a mastermind manipulator. He constantly asked me questions and baited me. I was green and naive. My answers just cracked him and Lama right up. They laughed and laughed at me. The American astronauts had just walked on the moon the previous year, so they asked me, did they see the beings there? Domo Geshe insisted there were plenty of living beings on the moon. He and Lama were like two little old ladies, cooking, enjoying the lake, the flowers, the peace, and laughing at me. They thought and laughed at everything. I could feel Domo Geshe's incredible power. I knew Lama also had that kind of power, but he never showed it to me the way Domo Geshe did. I could feel him sweeping my mind until there was nothing left in it but this visualization of a huge erect penis, and I knew he could see that. Well, I couldn't just sit there with that in my head, so I acted as if I had to do something. Just as I was about to go out the door, Domo Geshe burst out laughing and asked me, "How do you protect your mind?" I said I didn't know. He said to me, "You use your mantra." He was always doing things to my mind. It would suddenly go blank, then a vision would arise. I just knew he had put there. Domo Geshe could walk into your mind as if it were a living room. Later, Lama said to me, "You can have no more secrets because any Lama can just look into your mind and see what's there." I wondered how they learned to do that. Daily life at Kopan. More hippies continued to move into Kopan. Zina found them rooms and for a time even arranged for morning breakfast trays to be delivered by the Bhutanese nannies. One time when both Lamas and Zina were away, some travelers turned up with LSD. At the next full moon, everyone was stoned to the eyeballs. In Zina's absence, Rhea and Michael, Olivia's 4-year-old son, had been left in the care of the nannies. But they had not been paid in a while, and so they quit, leaving the children completely on their own. Fortunately, a young woman staying at Kopan realized that both children had diarrhea and needed care, which she gave to them. With medicine and good food, they soon recovered. Then one morning soon after, the place was suddenly clean, tidy, and tranquil again. The Lamas were back in their tiny room, which now had carpets and some shelves. Once again, the place ran like clockwork. Everyone attended evening puja and the occasional class where Lama Yeshe's eccentric English had them falling off their cushions with laughter. Lunch, always rice, dal, and vegetables, was served at 11:45 at the round brick table in the backyard, outside Lama's room. Quite often the Lamas helped with the cooking. They had no sense of status or hierarchy and helped out with all sorts of jobs around the place. People tended to compete with one another to sit next to Lama Yeshe at mealtimes, said Mary Finnegan, an English visitor. Lama Zopa was so thin and ascetic. He ate so little, so slowly, it made him seem stern. But Lama Yeshe was heaven. He'd put his arm around you and enfold you in this mass of red material, and he had this incredibly clean, slightly aromatic, incensey smell. All you wanted to do was cuddle up and get closer to him. He'd hold your hand, roar with laughter, and kick his legs in the air, which delighted us all enormously. I had left my children in England, and Lama Yeshe told me I should go back to them, so I did. Owa Delbanco also noticed the change whenever the Lamas returned. One night, sitting alone and depressed in his room, he decided to talk to Lama Yeshe. "Lama, I'm confused," he confessed. "Oh, you're confused. That's very good," Lama told him. A few moments later, Owa suddenly felt completely happy. His burden, real or imagined, or vanished. Another time, Zina returned to Kopan with Bhagavan Das, who had just spent a week in the Kathmandu hotel with his friend Baba Ram Das. High on peach melbas, hashish, and mescaline, as Ram Das wrote in Be Here Now, she also brought along the elegant Terry Clifford, an editor with Esquire magazine, who would eventually author the book Tibetan Buddhist Medicine and Psychiatry, The Diamond Healing. As usual, Zina knew everybody. Bhagavan Das was well over 6 feet tall, wore only a G-string, and had his matted hair piled high on his head, sadhu style. He adored Lama Yeshe and often performed his Hindi rituals in the Lama's room while they were doing puja, showering petals on their heads and clanging bells. Lama Yeshe happily rang his bell in unison. Pamela Crawford was teaching English at the American Library in Kathmandu and found her way to Copan. We walked along the dusty, rutted dirt road through the rice paddies out to Zena's house on the hill, Pamela recalled. The air was as still and pure as a robin's egg. Clouds scudded by, and the only sounds that could be heard in the morning fog were cuckoos, barking dogs, and the occasional child calling for his or her brother or sister at dawn, a time when people and creatures stirred, and there was singing in the fields. Zena welcomed us and introduced us to Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa, neither of whom spoke much English. I was embarrassed. I didn't know what kind of question to ask and wondered what we were doing there. Lama Zopa was very thin and seemed to be double-jointed. He taught me some Tibetan prayers I wrote down in my journal, even though I understood not a word. Lama Yeshe taught me to say Om Mani Padme Hum and to send love out. I just beamed into his eyes. It seems we figured things out almost telepathically in those days and seemed to understand each other without language. During the year we lived in Kathmandu, I observed the lamas. English improved very quickly. It was impressive. One day I took them to the American Library to see a movie about the moon landing. Afterward, walking back through the city streets, they were silent, so I asked them what they thought. They spoke between themselves for a minute. Then Lama Zopa said, "Why go to all that trouble? It's easy to go to the moon. You don't need rockets." Then suddenly they weren't speaking English anymore. Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa taught me my first prayers and meditation practices through gesticulations, charades, and a little mind-to-mind transmission. I came back to Lama Yeshe after a month of saying Om Mani Padme Hum continuously and told him that as long as I chanted the mantra, I was loving and blissfully happy. But as soon as I stopped, I became irritated and angrier than I had thought I could be. He laughed and said, "You're doing it right. Keep doing it." I told him it couldn't be right, but he assured me I would understand in time. Lama Yeshe tests Jan Willis. Jan Willis had a calculating, trained, academic mind. Other people were clearly besotted with Lama Yeshe, but she wondered if there might not be other lamas who were even better. One day, Lama Yeshe told Jan to take the next level of her teachings, calm, abiding practice, with Geshe Rabten in Dharamsala. "He is a very wise teacher. He is wisdom incarnate," Lama told Jan. "You shouldn't have any trouble because you can speak Hindi and travel easily. You go straight there, now." But Jan did not go straight there and dallied a while in Varanasi. When she finally arrived in Dharamsala, Geshe Rabten turned his big, powerful face toward her, pointed his finger, and began to yell. He was like the mountain on fire, Jan said. She understood enough of what he said to realize he was accusing her of not doing exactly what Lama Yeshe had ordered, that is, coming directly to Dharamsala. He didn't want to know my name or hear my story. He just wanted me to know I was there to study and arrived late, and this was serious. I fell totally in love with him. 6 weeks later, walking up Copan Hill at dusk, Jan Willis looked up at the Tibetan Thupten Yeshe looking down at her, a disgusted expression on his face. Having made eye contact, he turned and went into his room. "I felt bad as I entered," she said. "I was about to make the usual respectful 3 prostrations when Lama turned and threw another dreadful tirade in Tibetan at me. Suddenly, it struck me that there was absolutely no difference between these lamas. They had exactly the same things to teach me, and Lama had sent me on this trip, this long trip, just to find this out, to prove to me that with my critical judgmental mind, maybe I was not so smart after all. My arrogance just crumbled. I fell forward on all fours, crying and begging him to please accept me as his disciple and to forgive me for measuring him against Geshe Rabten. That moment sealed my relationship with Lama Yeshe. I saw that his wisdom was as vast as his compassion." Rabi and Rhonda had stayed in Nepal while Jan went to India. They bought a statue in Kathmandu from the back room of a tourist shop, not knowing the deity was Vajrasattva, a main figure in the purification practices essential to Tibetan Buddhism practice. When they showed the statue to Lama, he was very pleased, saying it was very auspicious. Soon after, Jan, Rabi, and Rhonda were the first Westerners to receive Vajrasattva initiation from Lama Yeshe. He told them, "You are the first Dorje Sampas." The second trek to Laudo. In May, it was time for another trip to Laudo. Zopa Rinpoche had responsibilities there and planned to stay for 2 months. The party trekked out from Lukla Airport, past green rivers and yellow rocks with mantras and sacred syllables carved into them. On, up and up. At night, they sheltered in smoky single-room dwellings with Sherpa families, while Rinpoche sat by the fire pit making blessing strings, red cotton string with a mantra blessed knot worked into it. Every Sherpa asked for a blessing string from Lama Zopa Rinpoche to add to the fading tangle of protection strings they wore around their necks. Sick people from all around Solokhumba turned up. Sick people from all around Solokhumbu turned up, confident that Rinpoche's mantra-empowered breath could heal them. The higher they climbed through the Himalayan hills, glowing with rhododendrons, the harder it got. Lama and Rinpoche ran up and down the line of puffing Ingis, encouraging and pacifying, telling stories to distract them from their muscle pain. Everyone was out of breath. Great, giant Himalayan eagles circled in the skies above. Bushy-tailed yaks turned to watch them pass. Finally, they arrived at Laudo. It was the end of the dusty and windy dry season just before monsoon, which generally arrives in Nepal in mid-June or early July, and food was even more scarce than usual. Sultram Alione, Rinpoche's sister Nagawan Samten, a tough, no-nonsense nun, gave us tea and soup and let us stay in the rough-hewn shrine room above her kitchen. It was incredibly smoky and cold. We woke up coughing, eyes burning. The next night, we asked Lama Yeshe for help getting to sleep. He told us, "Lie on your side and imagine your head is in the lap of red Amitabha Buddha. Pretend that your head is in the bowl of long life nectar, in his lap, and pass blissfully into sleep, experiencing the boundless lights of Amitabha." To get away from the smoke, Lama Zopa suggested we dig out little horseshoe-shaped holes in the side of the mountain and sit there in private meditation during the day. I was a Kagyu nun, but hadn't had any formal instruction. I was nervous about getting involved with Gelog education, based as it is on logic and a debate. Both lamas were very skilled at these. One argument with them got so convoluted, I threw up my hands and said, "I feel more confused now than before we started." "That's very good," said Zopa Rinpoche. "The intellect gets so tied up in knots it finally gives up and lets go." Sultram continued her story. "We lived on potatoes. They say that Guru Rinpoche introduced potatoes to Solokhumbu 1,000 years ago. Their potatoes are small, dark, yellow, sweet, and buttery. Nawang Samten boiled them in her big pots all day long, and we ate them with their skins on, dipped in salt, and the mouth-numbing local pepper called erma. We ate big piles of them every couple of hours, but after a few minutes we were hungry all over again. It was amazing how hungry we got, but the only things to eat were potatoes. Sometimes we served potato cakes or potato soup with cups of butter tea or sweet black tea with a little powdered milk. After a few weeks, my kidneys started hurting from the cold. 2 Americans turned up with a tin of roasted sesame seeds, and I thought I had never tasted anything better in my life. One American girl with us became infatuated with Lama Zopa, who kept patiently directing her to meditate on the suffering inherent in all attachments. Clouds periodically swept up the valleys like dragons, suddenly covering everything in a thick white blanket. Every day, a stream of local Sherpas came to see Rinpoche in his cave, asking for blessings and initiations, or just to talk and drink tea. Piero Seri was also in Laudo. The lamas were doing retreat together in the cave. They spent all night in there doing pujas. We often heard their bells and these big hand claps they would suddenly make together. One night I had terrible indigestion, like I was exploding. I felt something was really wrong, so I went up to the cave and sat down next to Lama Yeshe. He looked at me and said, "What's up?" I said to him, Lama, I'm incredibly sick because I ate too much. When I said that, Rinpoche burst out laughing, and I immediately felt this raging anger. How could he laugh when I felt so sick? But Lama Yeshe did a quick puja with bells and gave me a skull cup full of chang to drink. Suddenly I felt this force pushing me out of the cave. I fell outside through the door, vomiting and shitting everything out of me. Finally, I was able to breathe and feel alive again. For several years after that, Nawang Samten called me Piro Mang Po Kaka, meaning much kaka. We all liked to be around Lama Yeshe. In Italy, I was raised by priests. They told us how we should live, and eventually we all ran away from them. But Lama had such incredible love for us and never appeared to love one person more than another. We could feel it. If we wanted to go away and do something else, he never stopped us. He was not like the priests. Back at Kopan, Mayahana Teaching School. When at Laudo, Lama Yeshe had more private time to study and meditate. Since Rinpoche was the star, Lama could disappear into the background. Back at Kopan, Lama was always at the beck and call of all those who came up the hill. During Lama Yeshe's classes, Owa Del Banco, whom Zina nicknamed Babaji, a name he kept for life, made beautiful embroidered Tibetan-style bags he sold to rich hippies. Lama Yeshe got Owa to make a big sign that read Mayahanan Teaching School. Owa Del Banco. The condition was that if you lived there, you had to go to class. But for me, Lama Yeshe's most effective teachings were those I caught in a second, a look, a frown, a word. Everybody was asking for help with their problems, but he just encouraged me to go with my inner feelings. I have never asked anybody what I should do, he told me. In one teaching, Lama had been talking about whether or not to interfere in someone else's affairs. Somebody asked what he would do if he saw a drunken man beating a little boy. Not such an uncommon sight in that part of the world. Would you interfere then? They asked. Oh yes, I'd ask the man if he would like another drink, said Lama. Another time, an American boy full of self-pity began to whine and complain about all his troubles, pouring them out one after the other. After 10 minutes of this, everyone was depressed. Lama Yeshe didn't say anything at first. Then he suddenly burst out laughing. He laughed and laughed and laughed until the whole room joined in, including the American boy. Later, the boy said all his problems seemed to have suddenly disappeared. We often went for walks together to discuss things. One day, Lama turned up at my hut to go for a walk. I said, just let me fix the fire in the grate first. Lama said, let me. He put some sticks on and arranged the fire carefully, and we left. We were away for quite some time, but when we returned, that fire was burning as brightly as when we left it. I thought, what trick is this? Lama Yeshe got involved in everyone's problems. Knocking on the door of a girl sitting depressed and alone, he teased her out with, oh dear, please, you have lunch with me, please. I'm a little bit lonely today. The effect on her was magic. She felt so honored. He was very clever at making people feel they were helping him when really it was the other way around. He regularly gave out mantras to youngsters with broken hearts, never ridiculing them. To one boy, he gave a special mantra because the police had confiscated his passport. Everyone wanted to stay in Nepal forever, but visas were hard to renew. The boy said his mantra for weeks. Finally, to his great surprise and pleasure, the police refused to let him leave the country. Zopa Rinpoche moved into a little storeroom on the upper level behind the main house, while Lama Yeshe remained in his small dark room below. Both lamas began sitting in meditation with students for an hour each evening. Olivia de Halville came and went with her small son, now 5 years old. Whenever she left Michael at Kopan for some months, Lama Yeshe placed a small mattress in the corner of his room and took care of him like a mother. When both monks had to go to Delhi for a while, Lama instructed Francis Holmes, one of the more reliable types on the hill, to look after Michael, as well as several thin stray dogs he had been feeding daily. Francis was a little scared of Zina, whom Lama Yeshe called Mother, but also grateful for the way she let everyone use her private library. Zina had begun to write her autobiography, which she called O Samsara. Lama Yeshe often teased her about it. You should write your life story too, he told Francis. Everyone has experiences to tell. There's Mother. She's writing all these things about when she was a princess. You could write about going to the dentist. He made me feel I could do anything, said Francis. One day, Francis was having a private lesson with Lama when Zina, who was leaving for somewhere, barged into this little room and presented him with a long list of things for him to do in her absence. The water, the garden, the kitchen, the dogs, and so on. Lama Yeshe looked at the list and said to her, "We're not children. Off you go. We'll all be all right. The house won't fall down while you're away." When Zina left the room, he ripped the list into 50 pieces and tossed them in the air, recalled Francis. Lama Yeshe's English language. From the Lama's perspective, the world of all these Ingis was upside down. They had everything but drowned themselves in self-pity and a lack of confidence. It was ironic. Here were 2 refugees looking after a stream of well-educated middle-class Westerners, all of whom were full of fear and wringing their pale hands. "Don't freak out," Lama Yeshe exhorted. "You can help people. You can do. You should try to help mother sentient beings. You must try. Possible, possible. The mind is so strong. Never underestimate the power of mind." The women were particularly disheartened by the lack of female lineage holders in Tibetan Buddhism. "Well, maybe you can be the first woman Lama," he told them. "Fantastic." Of course, Lama was speaking in an enthusiastically overstated manner, as there had already been a number of women Lamas throughout Tibetan Buddhist history. His Western students slowly got used to Lama Yeshe's language, cheering and cherishing his eccentricities. Often one could only work out what he was saying by studying the accompanying gestures and facial expressions. When the meaning became clear, though, it often had a profound effect. Chamba Lane. Lama Yeshe worked constantly to improve his English and took lessons every Friday afternoon for more than a year from John Lane, an American. Time magazine, the only Western publication regularly available in Nepal, was a valuable source of words and ideas. "Why do Westerners care about that?" Lama Yeshe asked as they read an article together. John Lane said, "I was very serious. I was reading Evan Wentz's book on Tibetan Buddhism and was full of questions. Lama asked me, 'Who is Evan Wentz?' I explained that he was a very famous scholar. What is a scholar? He has experienced what he writes about. I said I didn't know, and he replied, 'Never listen to anyone who has not directly experienced what they are speaking about. People who translate without experience,' Lama pronounces this experience, are just pretending wisdom." I asked him to give me a Tibetan name and a private empowerment. "You want a full Tibetan initiation and ceremony? What for? Travel survivor? Travel souvenir?" "Okay, next week." But he did nothing about it, so I asked again. He gave me a name, Jampa. I asked how to spell it. "How do I know? I can't read or write your language. Find out for yourself." Then he sprinkled me with ice-cold water and flung rice at me, really hard. I wondered whether he was deliberately mocking the ceremony or just making me pay attention. I preferred studying alone and told him the Wednesday classes bored me to tears. "What?" he shouted. "You don't like class?" "What do you want? What do you want?" He was sneering at me. I told him I just wanted to meditate. Instantly, his demeanor changed from furious to placid, and he said, "Class is for those who think they need class. You meditate." When I told him that he seemed more like a wise older brother than a great teacher, he said to me, "I am not an older brother. I am your son. You are my father." I left Nepal to follow another teacher with Lama's full blessing. He never discouraged people, but sometimes when they had wild ideas, he'd say, "If you do that, you'll go berserky." Then he'd roll his eyes and stick out his tongue. The Inji students, mainly Christians and Jews, often considered it spiritually courageous to reject their religious backgrounds, but Lama Yeshe wasn't impressed. "Not necessary. It's the same thing, dear. The main thing is to be kind and happy," he said. Tibetan traditionalism had no appeal for Lama Yeshe either. He still went around in Zina's polyester roll neck, New York shirts in the wrong colors. She also bought him shoes and a watch. Max bought him socks and underpants. "Look what she's given me." Now she thinks I'm her husband. What am I supposed to do with these? Tibetans don't wear underpants. Some of the Americans around Kopan were shocked at the way Max and Zina fought with each other about who controlled the lamas. They repeatedly assured Lama Yeshi that both women were unusual and he shouldn't think all Americans were like them. Lama responded he knew that and that teaching them was an experiment on his part. He figured if they could practice Dharma, then anyone could. He said they were both very intelligent women with powerful personalities and could do much to benefit others. Max meets Marty. Max Matthews told Lama Yeshi she wanted to be a nun, but he had reservations. No, I can see in your mind you have a deep desire to be married. No, laughed Max. I'm finished with all that. It's there, he said. Max hadn't been back to the States for a dozen years or so, always spending her annual 3-month summer holidays on an island of Mykonos, Greece. During her summer holiday on the island in 1970, she embarked on a whirlwind romance with a handsome American man she met on the beach. When she returned to Kathmandu at the end of that summer, Marty Widener followed in his Volkswagen van. Once Max had returned to Nepal, she and Zina had yet another fight, this time over Kiran Bawan, an attractive house Max wanted but Zina had commandeered for her mother. Harriet had moved to Nepal at Zina's request to care for Rhea while she was in retreat. That was fine with Harriet, said Clive Giabori. She loved living all over the place. Her sister, Louise, also came for a while. Louise still had a bit of money left, which helped. Students had started donating money to Kopan. Zina had even made a prospectus for the place, which I helped her write. I held onto her handwritten autobiography for a time. It was an incredible manuscript written in purple ink and incomprehensible to anyone who was not a Zina adept. It was in 2 parts. I think Rhea ended up with 1 part, and the other got lost in Holland when the storage fees didn't get paid. Rhonda Solik spent some time typing up Zina's O Samsara manuscript. A part of me really liked her, said Rhonda. I was grateful for all she had made possible for us, but part of me also said this lady takes every kind of eccentric philosophy there is and tries to mush them all together. Zina told me Lama Yeshi had stopped her doing that. After this quarrel with Zina over Kiran Bawan, Max refused to go to Kopan. She and Marty moved into the fabulous walled and towered house of the old Rana kings at Tuntuli, just outside Buda, which came to be called Max's Rana house. The Lamas started spending weekends there, staying over on Saturday nights. Max usually went to bed early, but Marty enjoyed staying up late, cognac in hand, debating with the Lamas by the fire. They never seemed to sleep, recalled Marty. I'd get into these really spirited conversations with them. They nicknamed me Strong Sa because after a few drinks I'd express myself vehemently. It was all great fun, and they seemed to enjoy it too. I had great respect for them, but never became one of their students, so they never treated me like one. For instance, they patted the seat beside them for me to sit down. That always amazed the disciples sitting on the floor. I also just called them Yeshi and Zopa. Zopa never asked me to help him with English, but Yeshi and I went over lists of words together, and I'd single out ones I thought would be good Lama words because of their psychological content. It was quite difficult for them, being in the middle of this war between the Black Queen and the Red Queen, which is what I called Max and Zina. I thought the Lamas handled the situation with great integrity. I often drove them around in my van. Once when I got a flat tire, they both rolled up their sleeves and got dirty helping me change it. I really loved them for that. I sold that van to Prince Lenny Dorje from Bhutan. Then Max and I decided to get married. Max gets married. Lama Yeshi went to work organizing Max's wedding like a father of the bride. The Tibetans hadn't had a party for 10 years, and they were ready for one. Marty was taken to a different house the night before the ceremony. In the morning, a Tibetan man washed him and dressed him in Tibetan finery. The women dressed Max, affixing a traditional frame headpiece over which black wig hair was found. Plated and seated with turquoise and amber, she looked fabulous. Lama Yeshi began the day's pujas at 6 o'clock as the fields around the Rana house filled with colorful Tibetan tents. Jumpa Trinley's luxurious applique tent with striped awnings and lace curtains was filled with exquisite tankas, lights, incense, and flowers and served as a chapel. Lincoln's school closed for the day, and all the children in Max's 4th grade class served as flower girls and pages. The Tibetans wore every bit of brocade, coral, turquoise, and amber they owned and adorned their hair with as much of it as possible. While Lama Yeshe and Zopa Rinpoche performed still another puja, Max's old boyfriend, Hardy Fuhrer, flew over the wedding site in a small plane, showering the guests with rhododendron blossoms. The dancing, dining, and consumption of great quantities of chang and liquor from the American commissary lasted long into the night. As a wedding present, Lama Yeshe arranged for Max and Marty to have an audience with His Holiness the Dalai Lama in Dharamsala. I wore my Tibetan garb up to his house, Max recalled. A monk held the door open for us, saying, "Come in, come in." I asked where His Holiness was, and he laughed, because of course that was His Holiness. It was the first time I had met him. He gave us 2 wonderful hours, and we laughed and talked about emptiness. It went straight over my head, but he was planting seeds. Max's marriage is over. 1 month later, the marriage was over. Max came back to Nepal alone and promptly whisked Lama Yeshe off to Pokhara, 125 miles west of Kathmandu, by plane. Refugee camps had been established in the Pokhara Valley, and these later evolved into permanent Tibetan settlement communities, easily distinguishable by the profusion of prayer flags, gampas, and stupas. Max told Lama, "Now I'm ready to become a nun." Later, Max recalled, "We walked and talked. We had checked into some funky Tibetan hotel. One night in bed, there I suddenly found myself floating on the ceiling, looking down at my body. That was my one and only out-of-body experience. I'm sure Lama gave it to me as some kind of reward to show me I was on the right track, but I wasn't ever going to give him up. He was the best thing that had ever happened to me." There was absolutely no comparison between Lama Yeshe and ordinary men, and there was no going back for me. I had a huge sexual vibration, and some people might have got the wrong idea about Lama and me, but we always stayed in separate rooms when traveling together, and he never touched me. I watched how careful he was with people. Some he touched, others never. The first time he touched my hand was 5 years after this trip to Pokhara. Max told Marty she wanted to be a celibate nun. "It's not as if you are losing me to another man." Marty wasn't at all happy about this, but Lama Yeshe meditated. Not long after that, Marty met the woman he was to spend his life with, although he and Max never did get around to a divorce. Max stayed on at the Rana house, and the Lamas continued to spend Saturday nights there. Lama Yeshe marching down the hill from Kopan in sturdy western shoes, Zopa Rinpoche flying after him like a bird. "Lama told me I would never, ever be lonely," said Max, "and I never have been. I asked him what the most important thing was I could do besides keeping my job and paying for everything. He replied, 'Wisdom is not emotion, dear. Keep your mind healthy.' The first change he made in my life was to absolutely shatter my schedule. He just took over completely. Clearly, there was no longer any point in trying to run my own agendas." Slowly, Lama persuaded her to try and make peace with Zina and get to know the young people at Kopan. But hippies were never Max's cup of tea, and she was never really able to get along well with Zina. Olivia was aware of the tension between Max and her old friend. She also noted that many of Zina's jet-set friends had deserted her. It was to be expected. Zina was now a nun, and her money had run out. Lama Yeshe gave Olivia breathing lessons. He told me his main teaching for Westerners was to check up their motivation, and the most important mantras were "please" and "thank you," said Olivia. The monsoon came and went, and everything was lush and green. Kopan Hill was covered with lantana flowers, bamboo groves, and flourishing poinsettia bushes filled with blossoms. Lama Yeshe spent a lot of time looking after Olivia's son. The 2 children, Rhea Rachevsky and Michael Kasapidas, had become great friends. Rhea had led a very sheltered life, but had much more freedom now she lived with her grandmother, Harriet. Zina still dressed her immaculately and did not allow her to get dirty. Nepalese were always reaching out to pat the golden-haired child, but Zena was constantly afraid she would catch something. Now, with Michael in tow, Rhea learned to run and jump and play as never before. Sylvia White. One day, another American turned up at Copan. I was reading the bulletin board hanging outside the room where the lamas taught when this voice behind me asked, "Who are you?" recounted Sylvia White. There was this nun with a shaven head and intense blue eyes. She invited me into her sumptuous room, and we spent a wonderful afternoon talking about Paris. She invited me to attend a lecture the next day. I liked Lama Yeshe, though I wasn't exactly swept away. I was a Cartesian skeptic at heart. I doubt, therefore I am. Lama Yeshe was very present, salacious and rational, but I thought Lama Zopa was crazy. He would look off into the blue yonder, then suddenly start laughing uproariously, kicking his feet and falling over. I went to some of Lama Yeshe's classes and could understand his broken English, just enough to want to get more involved. "Don't believe me just because I say it," he said. "If it is true for you, then it is true. Check up in your heart. See if it is true there. I'm not trying to convince you." I went to more classes. Zena had a great deal of charm and manipulated everybody, but she could not manipulate Lama Yeshe. They would have words occasionally, but he never budged. She would throw a tantrum, give him the silent treatment, then say she was sorry. He'd give an inch and they'd work it out. It was never unpleasant. I moved into Copan and took a room right next to Lama Yeshe's. I'd fall asleep each evening listening to his chanting. He had big plans for Copan. These included buying the hill, which depended on the cooperation of the Nepalese neighbors, and raising enough money. A ragged fence went up around the hill with a corrugated iron gate with big Buddha eyes painted on it, like the eyes on the Buddha stupa. One day I opened the gate to a Tibetan woman who was very upset and asking for Lama Yeshe. I took her to his room, and he asked me to make her some Tibetan tea. This takes some time. When I returned, she was much calmer and happier. The next day, she came back, wreathed in smiles and loaded with gifts. I took her to him again, went off to make some tea. After she left, I asked Lama what she was doing. "Don't worry about it," he said. Well, that wasn't good enough for me. I pressed him, and he told me. The first day, she was upset because she got a letter saying her son was planning to escape from Tibet. She wanted to know if I could find out if he was safe. I told her he was fine and would arrive in Kathmandu around noon the following day. I asked him how he knew that, and he said, "Oh, Lama has his ways." I asked if he had ever seen that woman before. He said he had not, nor did he know her son. So I asked how he knew that the boy would arrive. He told me, "I went there with my mind and saw him on the road, and I thought, well, he is at that place and has this much further to walk. So he will be in Kathmandu by noon." It seems he was right, so she had come back to thank him. Anne McNeil. In October, Anne McNeil, a lanky Canadian ski instructor, arrived from Mykonos to stay with her friend Max. Anne McNeil said, "Max asked me if I wanted to receive a teaching from Lama Yeshe. She had given me a room in the lower tower of her house, and Lama Yeshe came up there. He taught me how to watch and count my breath, to imagine it entering and leaving." Lama Yeshe's instructions on meditation on the breath. First, sit cross-legged in the lotus or half-lotus position if you can, or just comfortably. Make sure your mind is here with your body. It's no good if your body is here but your mind is at home. You can't take a meditation course with your body alone. Meditation is done by the mind. Therefore, your mind should be with you in the present, not obsessed with another time, place, person, or some other object. The method we use to bring attention totally to the here and now is concentration on the breath, focusing on how your breath moves through your nervous system. This is not all that this method is helpful for. It has many other benefits. It can even help you recover from physical illness. For example, if your nervous system has been damaged by a stroke, intensive concentration on the movement of your breath through your nervous system can restore its function. This is experience, not just empty talk. If you are unfamiliar with the following meditation, you might find it easier to concentrate by occluding the nostril you are not focusing on with your index finger. As you breathe out through your left nostril, use your finger to block the right. Exhale slowly, don't rush it. Breathe normally, but make sure to exhale completely. Then move your finger to block the left nostril as you inhale slowly and deeply through your right. Then, for a second time, block your right nostril while you exhale slowly, gently, naturally, and completely through the left. And then block your left nostril as you again inhale slowly and completely through the right. Repeat all this for a third time. Thus, you exhale through the left and inhale through the right 3 times. Then reverse the procedure, breathing out through the right and in through the left 3 times. While doing this, sit up straight. This keeps your nervous system straight and allows the air you inhale to pervade your whole body, your entire nervous system. If you don't keep your spine straight when you meditate, it is difficult for the breath energy to spread throughout your nervous system. Nevertheless, do this practice very naturally. Don't force it. When you inhale, feel that the air completely fills your body, and when you exhale, feel that it completely leaves. But while you're doing this, don't sit there thinking, now I'm doing this breathing exercise. That's not necessary. Just do it, concentrating on the movement of the breath energy through your nervous system as much as you possibly can. Also, don't think that this meditation is ridiculously simple. If you are aware, you will notice that people who are emotionally or mentally disturbed, for example, those who are depressed, breathe differently from normal people. This shows that the way that breath energy moves through the nervous system is very closely connected with the mind. You know from your own experience that when you are angry, you don't breathe normally. Sometimes anger can even make you physically sick. You can measure scientifically how many times a day you breathe in and out. Buddhism has also calculated this. If you train yourself in the breathing meditation and practice breathing in and out slowly every day, you can prolong your life. If air enters your nervous system in a disturbed way, it can disturb your mind. You should breathe steady, slowly, naturally, and completely like a reliable old clock ticking away. Your breath is like an internal clock. After you have breathed out through the left and in through the right 3 times, and out through the right and in through the left 3 times, breathe in and out through both nostrils together. Again, bring the air in slowly, gently, naturally, and completely, allowing it to fill your nervous system, and slowly, gently, and completely send it out again. If your belt is too tight, loosen it. You should be comfortable when you do this practice. Again, don't think, I am doing the breathing exercise, right nostril, left nostril. Just let your mind dwell in the concentration. Breathe in and out through both nostrils together about 20 times. The following weekend, he gave me another lesson, Anne continued. I told him I'd done transcendental meditation and been involved with the Hare Krishnas and wondered which technique he thought was best for my temperament. He suggested we go to Sawambua to ask Serkong Dorje Cheng what he thought. Then he pulled out this long Tibetan text and said, "Meanwhile, I'll just recite this to bless you and give you a mantra. Just relax and meditate while I read." He started reading, and I noticed something interesting happening to his face. It was kind of lifting off like a mask. I watched it float out about 4 times, 4 inches, drift over to one side, then go back to where it was. I thought, wow, this is even more interesting than acid. He continued reading, and it happened again. This time I really looked at it hard. I saw that the floating mass, though similar and Tibetan looking, wasn't really his own face. I thought if it happens again, I'll know I'm really seeing something. And it did. It happened again. Then Lama finished reading and got me to write down what I later discovered was the Vajrasattva mantra. By that time I was pretty excited by him and said I didn't think we really had to go see another Lama. But he said, no, we should go. The next day was Max's day off, so he pushed her to get out her little blue Volkswagen car, and we drove over to Serkong Dorje Cheng. He threw a mo and said to do whatever I'd been doing before I joined the Hare Krishnas. I told Lama I'd been into many different things. "Doesn't matter, dear, we'll ask again," he said. The next time the answer was, "Doesn't matter which path you take to enlightenment, they all lead there." So I thought, oh darn, I'll just have to make the decision myself. But I liked Lama Yeshe, so I asked him if he would be my guru. He said, yes, dear, and that was that. The following day, Max asked me to escort Lama to Copan. I would find out there where it was and be able to hear his lecture that afternoon. She told me to make sure he didn't dawdle, so he got there on time. As we walked up from Budha, there was dew on the ground. Lama stopped constantly to pick up these worms lying on the path and put them to one side, so they wouldn't get stepped on. I said it was going to make us late, and would he please stop? He just looked at me. His face was so shiny, so radiantly blissful, it was unforgettable. I knew he was showing me this bliss for my benefit, but I just didn't know what to do with the experience. When the Lamas returned to the Rana house the following weekend, Max discussed her ordination with Lama Yeshe, at which point Anne asked to be ordained as well. Lama said that his own teacher, Geshe Rabten, should perform the ceremony. 1 week later, Geshe Rabten sent a message saying he would ordain them in Dharamsala on December 16th. Lama Yeshe suggested to Sylvia White, now living in Kathmandu with Harriet Strauss, that she too might like to get ordained. There was also an American boy, James, whose surname is not known, who had been taking teachings for some time. He also wanted to become ordained. By now, the Lamas were holding regular classes on Wednesdays and Sundays for a dozen or so Westerners. Numbers grew as the word went out there were teachings available in English. Well, sort of English. Lama Yeshe taught in Tibetan, interspersed with an occasional string of complex psychological terms he had learned in English. Lama Zopa then translated. Lama Yeshe constantly deferred to his closest disciple during these teachings. Zopa Rinpoche is much better at teaching than I am, he said. I'm nobody, just a monk, not even a Geshe. I'm a dropout Geshe. Where he did push his charge was at the dinner table, constantly encouraging the frail Zopa Rinpoche, who did not look well, to eat. You must eat. You must be strong for all sentient beings. Lama Yeshe occasionally referred to his own weak heart, saying, you never know how long your teacher will be with you. By November, Jan Willis and Robbie and Rhonda Solik had to leave Nepal. Before departing, they asked Lama Yeshe to give them the Bodhisattva vows, the 18 root vows and 46 auxiliary vows that support the cultivation of an altruistic good heart, which are taken for life. These include such vows as to continue studying Dharma to help others materially, emotionally, and spiritually as much as one is able, to abandon anger, self-interest, and wasting time, and other vows with a similar bias to benefit others as much as possible. The Bodhisattva vows are only given to students with some experience, and this was the first time Lama Yeshe had ever granted them to Westerners. He invited 4 monks from Samten Ling in Bodha to come up to Copan with their big drums, damaras, and longhorns to assist at a formal ceremony in Zina's big room. Jan Willis returned to America to complete her master's degree in Cornell University, submitting a collection of meditations Lama Yeshe had given to students at Copan. In 1972, these were published as the Diamond Light of the Eastern Dawn. This was the first time Lama Yeshe's teachings had ever been published. Stephen Zagar, an old college friend of the Zoliks, moved into their rooms near Copan and began attending the Lama's classes. Every evening around sunset, we meditated together, said Steve. The room filled with mosquitoes, and I could not sit still, but I could see the 2 Lamas with the sun going down behind them, sitting as still as statues. I wondered how they could bear it. Afterward, I asked Lama Yeshe how he could let the mosquitoes just fly around his face, and he said, dear, it's a blessing to be able to feed them. This was a new thought to me. The Lamas were great, but I needed stronger discipline than what there was at Copan. I went down to Ganesh Puri and met Baba Mukhahanda. That was it for me. I stayed on that path. Many years later, I took sannyas and became a Swami. The first group ordination. From Lama Yeshe's teachings to his monks and nuns. The reason we are unhappy is because we have extreme craving for sense objects, samsaric objects, and we grasp at them. We are seeking to solve our problems, but we are not seeking in the right place. The right place is our own ego grasping. We have to loosen that tightness, that's all. According to the Buddhist point of view, monks and nuns are supposed to hold renunciation vows. The meaning of monks and nuns renouncing the world is that they have less craving for and grasping at sense objects. But you cannot say that they have already given up samsara, because monks and nuns still have stomachs. The thing is, the English word renounce is linguistically tricky. You can say that monks and nuns renounce their stomachs, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they actually throw their stomachs away. So I want you to understand that renouncing sensory pleasure doesn't mean throwing nice things away. Even if you do, it doesn't mean you have renounced them. Renunciation is a totally inner experience. Renunciation of samsara does not mean you throw samsara away because your body and your nose are samsara. How can you throw your nose away? Your mind and body are samsara. Well, at least mine are, so I cannot throw them away. Therefore, renunciation means less craving. It means being more reasonable instead of putting too much psychological pressure on yourself and acting crazy. The important point for us to know, then, is that we should have less grasping at sense pleasures, because most of the time our grasping at and craving desire for worldly pleasure does not give us satisfaction. That is the main point. It leads to more dissatisfaction and to psychologically crazier reactions. That is the main point. Both Kopan and the Rana house were in chaos as the lamas, Zina, and the 4 students to be ordained organized their robes and gifts for the officiating monks. Lama Yeshe came back from Kathmandu with a huge stack of text for His Holiness the Dalai Lama, including one particularly wide handwritten text containing many illustrations. The others were printed from woodblocks. He asked Anne to find suitcases to put them in. At Kathmandu airport, the custom officers were constantly on the lookout for antiques, which could not leave the country. The illustrated text was packed into a round case on its own, and Anne was nervous when they asked her to see it. "Okay, let me open it for you," she suggested, and swiftly turned to a page with no illustrations. Max and Lama had both wandered off and disappeared at the end of the customs hall. Lama was spinning his mala so fast I knew he was up to something. The customs official looked at the page for a long moment, then said we could go through. When I had joined the others, I could hardly breathe, said Anne. The authorities were looking for Nepalese antiques. This was Tibetan. From Delhi, Zina, Sylvia, James, and Zopa Rinpoche traveled to Dharamsala by train. Max had arranged for herself, Lama Yeshe, and Anne to fly, but they were grounded at Delhi due to a strike. It was late at night. A taxi driver at the airport approached Max and begged her to let him take them to Dharamsala. He remembered her from a trip to the Taj Mahal 3 years earlier. Even Delhi could be a small town, especially with regard to the foreigners who tipped well. In the middle of the night, they came to a state border barred by gate and a sleeping sentry who could not be roused. "You must know some way around this," Lama encouraged the driver, who then drove off the road and crossed the river below via boards and Little Island. Arriving in Dharamsala, they took rooms at the local government guest house. These are called dak bungalows, or dak guest houses, and can be found all over India and other parts of the former British Empire. They were about to go and have breakfast when the Ingis expressed some concerns about the unlocked doors. Padlocks were a necessity, and they hadn't brought any. "This will do," said Lama Yeshe, wrapping his mala around the doorknob. "No one will have the nerve to take that off." Later that day, they moved into the famously seedy hotel Kailash in McLeod Ganj, the village above Dharamsala, much to the visible disgust of the local monks. "Well, if you don't like me being here, give me a better place," Lama Yeshe told them. They shuffled away. Everyone in Dharamsala was on the thin edge of poverty, and they didn't have a better place. Lama Yeshe organized everything. On the eve of the big day, Lama brought his students to an interview with His Holiness the Dalai Lama, seeking his approval and blessing. The next day, December 16, the ordination took place at Chopra House, Kiabaj Ling Rinpoche's residence, located on a hill just outside McLeod Ganj. Geshe Rabten presided as they had promised, along with Lama Yeshe, Gen Jampa Wangdu, and 2 other monks. Traditionally, 4 monks and an abbot were required for monastic ordination ceremonies. Lama Zopa Rinpoche did not attend. The 4 Westerners received a short lecture in English on the vows they were about to take, but the ceremony itself was in Tibetan. They were instructed not to speak or ask questions. Whenever a response was required, Lama answered on their behalf. Afterward, everyone posed for photos. One photo shows a newly ordained Sylvia White sitting on the veranda of Ling Rinpoche's house, sulking furiously. "It was a terrible day for me," she said. "We had all taken precepts, so couldn't eat anything after midday. Everyone else went off to a restaurant, but we had to fast. My blood sugar drops quickly if I don't eat in the morning, and I become very testy. But more than that, I felt trapped by the commitment I had just made, when I hadn't really been told exactly what I was promising to do. I also resented the fact that we could not participate in the ceremony nor answer for ourselves. It was a case of the Western individualist dynamic clashing with the Eastern humility of knowing your place. I was furious. While everyone else went back to Delhi, Max and Anne stayed in Dharamsala to do retreat at Gonsar Rinpoche's monastery. On the first night there, Anne dreamed of Lama Yeshe's face floating near her. I felt like I was being visited, checked up on. It was wonderful, she said. Lama arranged for the 2 nuns to meet His Holiness the Dalai Lama. His Holiness remembered the gorgeous Tibetan bride Max had been and laughed heartily at her short hair and robes. Ani Nagpo, he called her, the black nun. Max hadn't completely shaved her head, but wore her hair extremely short. Lincoln School valued Max as a member of their teaching staff. They didn't mind that their 4th grade teacher had become a nun, but told her they would appreciate her not shaving her head completely. Lama Yeshe's first public speaking engagement. Lama Yeshe was invited to speak at an international yoga conference in Delhi at the end of December. It was his first public engagement. He dictated his speech to Sylvia White, who wrote it down. It was a very brief explanation in English of the Lamrim and the more advanced techniques of Tantra. He asked Zopa Rinpoche to read it for him because he didn't trust his own pronunciation. Afterwards, some journalists asked if he would answer questions. "Of course, dear." "What do you think of hippies taking drugs and then asking for Buddhist teachings?" they asked. Lama said he didn't see anything wrong with it, that perhaps mind-expanding drugs opened doors for these people or even led them to investigate their minds. It was a controversial view that upset some of those present, who translated his message as, "This Lama tells them it's okay to take drugs." But Lama Yeshe didn't mind. He just said what he thought and attracted a number of new Western students in the process. Some weeks earlier, Olivia de Halville had left Copan. "You can say goodbye to Lamas, Livia, but Lamas will never say goodbye to you," Lama Yeshe had told her. They met again at the yoga conference. "Livia, you come and stay with us in our hotel," he said. The Lamas were staying in a rather luxurious hotel. "I was in their room that night," said Olivia. "Lama Yeshe picked up this fountain pen, opened the side lever, and quite deliberately poured ink all over this pristine, fluffy white rug. I exclaimed, 'Lama, what are you doing?' But he was very unconcerned and strangely determined. It was quite clear he was teaching me something about non-attachment." When Max and Anne returned to Delhi, Lama took his new nuns to see Domo Geshe Rinpoche, who was curating texts at Tibet House, a cultural center established by the Dalai Lama. Lama Yeshe asked the nuns if they had a question for Rinpoche, who rarely gave teachings and accepted very few students. Max said she wanted one of his famous pills she had heard about, pills he had made in his previous lifetime with mountain lion milk. He laughed and gave blessed pills to everyone.